The morning sun filtered through the thin cotton curtains of the small mud-walled house, casting a pale light over the quiet room. Mira lay awake on the straw mat, her twin daughters nestled beside her, their tiny breaths steady and warm. The village outside stirred to life, cattle lowing, women drawing water from the well, and men shouting greetings across the fields, but inside this house, silence hung like a weight. Mira was 22, but life had aged her in ways no mirror could reflect. Just weeks ago, she had been the wife of Rajat, a farmer whose rough hands held more tenderness than anyone ever gave him credit for. Their marriage had been arranged, like all others in the village, but over time they had grown into something close to love. When Mira found out she was pregnant, Rajat had smiled in a way she hadn't seen before, hopeful, proud. But that hope had turned to tragedy. The labor had been long and brutal. Rajat had rushed for help when she began bleeding, but he never made it back. On the way home, he had collapsed from a heart attack, news that reached Mira just hours after. She had given birth to not one, but 2 daughters. The moment the midwife declared, "Girls," the air shifted. No celebration, no joyful calls from the women outside. Mira had clutched her babies to her chest, heartbroken and elated all at once. But when her mother-in-law entered the room, the expression on her face told Mira everything she needed to. No, 2 mouths to feed and no son to carry his name? The old woman had hissed, "You've cursed us." From that day on, Mira became less than a widow, less than a person. She became a burden. Her father-in-law refused to speak to her. Her sister-in-law, once a friend, now walked past her as though she didn't exist. Food was left cold and out of reach. The babies cried in the night, and Mira, still recovering from childbirth, crawled across the floor to feed them while the rest of the house slept soundly. The village whispered. Some pitied her. Others blamed her. She must have done something in her past life. A woman muttered one day at the well. First, she kills her husband, then gives birth to girls. Mira heard it all, but she said nothing. Not because she didn't want to speak, but because no one was listening. Her in-laws banned her from leaving the compound. They took the small silver anklets her husband had given her, claiming she no longer had a right to wear gifts meant for a wife. They called the girls burdens, refusing to name them, refusing to hold them. Mira survived by carving out her own small world. She found patches of sun where she could sit with her daughters. She sang to them softly when the others were gone. She gave them secret names, Nivi and Rhea, and whispered those names into their ears when no one else was around. At night, when the cries became too loud and her exhaustion too deep, she would stare up at the cracked ceiling and wonder how much more she could endure. But then one of the twins would grab her finger, or both would breathe in unison against her chest, and Mira would remind herself, "They have no one but me." One morning, as she stepped outside to dump out the wash water, Mira noticed a man standing at the far end of the road beside a bullock cart. He was watching the house with narrowed eyes. His face was unfamiliar, yet something about him felt known, like a thread from a past life she couldn't place. She quickly looked away, fearing the wrath of her mother-in-law, who barked orders from inside. Mira turned back into the courtyard, her daughters cooing softly in the corner. The man on the road lingered for a moment longer before turning away. He had seen enough to know something was wrong. But for Mira, life continued, quiet, colorless, and full of pain. Still, every day. She woke, she picked up her children, and she endured. Because that is what women like her were taught to do: suffer quietly, survive silently, and never expect rescue. The sun had barely risen when the harsh clang of the iron pot shattered the early morning calm. Mira flinched as the door to her small room slammed open, revealing her mother-in-law's stern face framed by tight gray hair. The woman's eyes were cold, unyielding eyes that held years of bitterness and cruelty. "You call this food?" she snapped, tossing a small bowl of watery porridge onto the dirt floor. "Your daughters will starve if you keep feeding them like that." Myra's heart clenched, but she said nothing. She knelt silently, gathering the porridge with shaking hands to feed her babies. Their soft cries filled the tiny room, and Myra kissed their foreheads, her lips trembling. The in-laws' disdain was a constant shadow. Growing heavier with each passing day, she was forbidden from sitting with the family during meals, left only scraps to eat, and often told to sleep outside the main house on a cold wooden bench. The cold bit into her bones at night, but it was better than the stifling anger inside the walls. Every day brought a fresh wave of punishment. When the babies cried too loudly, Myra was beaten for being a bad mother. When she dared to step outside the compound to fetch water, her brother-in-law would glare at her, shouting, "Side, you useless woman! The village will whisper your shame." Even her own sister-in-law, once kind and smiling, now avoided her like a disease. Sometimes Myra caught her looking with pity but saying nothing. The silence was deafening. One afternoon, Myra was preparing a meager meal of boiled lentils when a sudden blow landed across her cheek. Her mother-in-law's hand was swift and hard. "Stop wasting our food on those cursed girls. They will never bring honor to this family," she hissed, eyes burning with hatred. Myra's cheek stung, but her resolve did not break. She turned her gaze to the two small babies in the corner, their eyes wide and innocent, unaware of the hatred that surrounded them. She whispered softly to them, "You are my light. You are my strength." Yet the isolation gnawed at her soul. The house felt more like a prison, each room closing in on her like the walls of a tomb. No one came to visit. No one offered a kind word or a helping hand. Myra was left to bear the weight of scorn alone. Outside, the village continued its daily rhythm. Women in bright saris laughed and talked as they carried water pots. Children ran barefoot through dusty streets, and men tended to their fields. But Myra felt invisible, erased from the world she once belonged to. Her only escape was the small patch of sunlit earth outside the back door, where she could sit with her daughters, sing lullabies, and imagine a life beyond these walls. One evening, after the children were asleep, Myra dared to speak quietly to her late husband's old wooden chest. She ran her fingers over the worn carvings and murmured, "Rajet, if you can hear me, give me strength. Help me protect our girls." But strength was scarce and exhaustion relentless. Myra's body ached, bruises faded slowly, and her heart grew heavy with despair. Yet, even in the depths of her suffering, she refused to give up, because giving up meant giving in to the hatred. And Myra loved her daughters too fiercely to surrender. The dusty road that wound through the village was quiet in the early morning light, save for the soft rustling of leaves and distant crowing of roosters. Myra sat near the well, washing a threadbare cloth for her daughters. Her hands moved automatically, the cold water numbing the aches in her fingers. The weight of the past months pressed heavily on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the far end of the lane, a tall man walking steadily, his boots stirring up small clouds of dust. Myra paused, eyes narrowing as she tried to place the unfamiliar face. He moved with purpose, but there was a gentleness in his step, as if he was cautious in this place, a place that seemed to hold nothing but sorrow for her. She turned away quickly, fearing curiosity might draw attention. But the man's gaze did not waver. He stopped just beyond the well, watching the small house where Myra lived. His name was Arjun, though Myra didn't know it yet. He had been away for years working in the city, seeking a life different from the one he'd left behind. The village had changed, yet its scars remained deep. His uncle's farm was still there, tangled with weeds, waiting for someone to care for it. Arjun's heart clenched when he thought of Myra. He remembered her as a quiet girl with a kind smile, the one who always shared her lunch with him during school days. He had left without saying goodbye, chasing dreams that seemed impossible here. But fate had brought him back. As he stood there, he saw the small figures through the window, the two babies sleeping fitfully in a cramped room. And there was Mira, her shoulders stooped, her face pale and tired. Arjun's jaw tightened. He knew something was wrong. That evening, the village was alive with chatter as people gathered around the fire pits. Arjun walked through the crowd, catching glimpses of Myra's name whispered in tones that ranged from pity to blame. He overheard a woman say, "She brings nothing but shame to that family." Another added, "Two girls? They say the gods have cursed her." He felt a surge of anger but kept his face calm. He didn't want to start fights, not yet. He only wanted to find Mira to see if she was truly safe. The next day, Arjun sought out Mira. He found her near the edge of the village, watching her daughters play under a scraggly tree. Her eyes lifted briefly, surprise flickering when their gazes met. "Mira," he said softly, uncertain if she would remember him. Her eyes widened. "Arjun? You're back." He nodded. "I came back from my uncle's farm, but I see you've been through much more than I knew." She looked down, a shadow crossing her face. "It's nothing you should concern yourself with." But Arjun wouldn't turn away. "It is my concern if you're hurting. No one should suffer alone." For the first time in months, Mira felt a small crack in the walls she'd built around herself. She hesitated, then whispered, "They hate me for my girls, my in-laws. They blame me for everything." Arjun's expression hardened. "That's cruel and wrong." Myra's voice broke. "I have nowhere else to go." He stepped closer. "Then come with me. I can help. You and the babies don't have to stay there." Mira swallowed hard, torn between fear and hope. The thought of leaving was terrifying. What would her in-laws do? What would the village say? But the thought of staying was unbearable. She looked into Arjun's steady eyes and, for the first time in a long time, she felt the possibility of safety. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said quietly. "Sometimes," Arjun said, "doing what's right feels like trouble. But it's worth it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, Mira made a choice that would change everything. She nodded slowly. "I'll come with you." And with that, the first step toward freedom was taken, not just for Mira, but for her daughters as well. The day dawned cold and gray, with clouds gathering over the village like an omen. Mira's small house sat quiet, but tension simmered just beneath the surface. Her in-laws had begun to suspect something, that their precious control was slipping away. The scowl on her mother-in-law's face was darker than usual, the air thick with unspoken threats. Mira sat on the worn wooden bench outside, her twin daughters wrapped in a thin cloth on her lap. She kept her eyes lowered, feeling the weight of every glance from her harsh family. Her heart pounded quietly, a mixture of fear and resolve. From a distance, Arjun watched the scene unfold, heart aching at the cruelty. He had come early that morning, hoping to help Mira pack a few things before they left, but had stopped short when he saw what was about to happen. Suddenly, the mother-in-law stormed out of the house, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "You are a disgrace to this family. Twin girls? How could you bring such shame?" Mira flinched but remained seated, clutching her daughters closer. The brother-in-law stepped forward, his eyes hard. "You will leave this house by nightfall. Take your cursed children with you." Mira tried to stand, but the mother-in-law shoved her back roughly, her nails digging into Myra's arm. "Stay where you belong," she snarled. A sharp cry pierced the air. The babies startled awake, their tiny faces scrunched in confusion and fear. Mira's breath hitched as tears sprang to her eyes. The village neighbors gathered, drawn by the commotion but keeping their distance. No one stepped forward to intervene. Fear and tradition had silenced them all. That's when Arjun moved. He strode forward, placing himself between Mira and her attackers. His voice was calm but firm, enough that the mother-in-law whipped around, eyes blazing. "Who are you to interfere? I'm someone who won't stand by while you hurt a woman and her children," Arjun said steadily. The brother-in-law sneered, "You're meddling where you don't belong." "I'm meddling where justice is needed," Arjun replied, scanning the crowd. "Look at her. Look at what you've done." Mira stood trembling, but a spark of courage flickered inside her. For the first time in weeks, someone had spoken out on her behalf. The mother-in-law's fury erupted into violence. She grabbed Mira roughly by the arm and dragged her a few steps away, striking her across the face. The crack of the slap echoed sharply, and the crowd gasped. Arjun didn't flinch. Instead, he reached out and caught Mira before she fell. "You're coming with me," he said quietly, looking into her tear-streaked face. Mira nodded, tears mixing with dirt on her cheek. With careful hands, Arjun lifted the babies into his arms and led Mira away from the angry crowd. The murmurs followed them, some angry, some shocked, but no one moved to stop them. As they walked, Mira's heart pounded, not just from the fear but from a fragile hope. They reached Arjun's uncle's cottage at the edge of the village. It was small and simple, surrounded by wildflowers and trees. Here, the air smelled of earth and freedom, something Mira hadn't breathed in months. Arjun settled Mira inside and sat her down gently. "You're safe here," he promised. She looked around, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "Why are you helping me?" He smiled faintly. "Because no one deserves to be treated like this. Especially not you and not your daughters." As night fell, Mira held her babies close, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Outside, the village slept on, but inside that small cottage, a quiet rebellion had begun. The small cottage stood quietly at the edge of the village, its wooden beams creaking softly in the evening breeze. Inside, the warm glow of a single lantern illuminated the sparse room where Mira sat with her twin daughters in her lap. Their soft breaths were steady, and for the first time in weeks, they were free from the sharp eyes and harsh words of the in-laws. Arjun moved quietly around the room, bringing a pot of warm water and some simple food. The cottage was humble bare. Walls, a few wooden stools, and a faded quilt draped over a small cot, but to Mira, it felt like a palace. "Here," Arjun said, placing the bowl gently before her. "Eat, you need your strength." Mira looked up, surprised by the kindness in his voice. She hesitated before taking a small spoonful, her hands still trembling from shock and exhaustion. The warm food soothed more than just her hunger. It was the first comfort she had known in a long time. Arjun sat down beside her, careful not to crowd the fragile space they shared. "You're safe now. No one will harm you here." But Mira's eyes were wary. "What if they come after me? My in-laws have power in this village. People are afraid of them." Arjun nodded slowly. "We will make sure that doesn't happen. You won't face this alone." She looked at her babies, wrapped in the thin cloths she had sewn for them. "I don't know how to be strong. I've been beaten, ignored, and left to suffer. I don't even know who I am anymore." Arjun reached out, placing a steady hand on hers. "Strength isn't something you have to find alone. Sometimes it comes from the people who stand beside you." Mira's voice softened. "Thank you, Arjun." Days passed in a fragile rhythm. Arjun helped Mira bathe the babies, gather firewood, and mend their few belongings. He spoke little of his past, but listened intently to hers whenever she chose to share. In the evenings, Mira would sit by the window, watching the village lights flicker in the distance. Sometimes the weight of loneliness pressed down on her, and tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. But Arjun was always there, patient, steady, a quiet guardian in the storm. One afternoon, as Mira rocked one of the babies, Arjun spoke carefully. "We should tell someone what happened. The village needs to know the truth." Mira shook her head. "If I speak, they will only blame me more. The law is slow, and my in-laws are powerful." "I'll stand with you," he said firmly. "Together, we can make a difference." Mira looked into his eyes and saw a resolve she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a flicker of hope, a promise that maybe justice was possible. That night, as the baby slept soundly for the first time without fear, Mira whispered, "Maybe I can be strong after all." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of change. The quiet peace of the cottage was shattered one morning by a harsh pounding on the wooden door. Mira's heart leapt into her throat as she clutched her babies tightly, glancing nervously at Arjun. "Stay calm," he whispered, moving to open the door. Outside stood a group of stern-faced villagers, men and women from the community, led by Myra's brother-in-law and a few others from her in-laws' family. Their faces were hard, eyes filled with anger and suspicion. "You have no right to hide her here," the brother-in-law spat. "She's a disgrace, and those cursed girls must not live among us." Arjun stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Myra is not a disgrace. She is a mother protecting her children from harm. You have no right to threaten her or bring violence to this home." The villagers murmured among themselves, but the brother-in-law's glare did not waver. "This village follows our customs. You're breaking them by sheltering her. We demand she return at once." Mira's voice trembled as she spoke. "I will not go back. Not until my daughters are safe." The crowd's anger grew. Some villagers began shouting, their words sharp and cruel. "She has brought shame to the family. She defies tradition." Arjun's jaw tightened. Tradition does not justify cruelty. You cannot punish a woman for bearing daughters. One of the older men stepped forward, his voice cold. "You outsiders do not understand our ways. Leave now or face the consequences." The threat hung heavy in the air, but Arjun stood his ground. "We are not afraid." Suddenly, a harsh voice called out from the crowd. "We will see if your courage lasts when the entire village turns against you." Mira felt tears sting her eyes as she looked at the angry faces surrounding her. The world she had known was closing in, threatening to crush the fragile hope she had begun to feel. But Arjun reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You are not alone," he said quietly. The confrontation ended with threats hanging like a dark cloud, and the villagers reluctantly withdrew, though their eyes promised that the battle was far from over. Inside the cottage, Mira wept quietly, the weight of the day pressing down on her. "Why won't they leave us in peace?" she asked. Arjun pulled her close. "Because they fear change. Because they cling to old ways, even when those ways hurt the innocent." Mira wiped her tears, determination hardening her voice. "Then we must be stronger than their hatred," Arjun nodded. "And we will find allies. People who believe in justice, in kindness." As night fell, the cottage was filled with quiet resolve. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger. But Mira no longer faced it alone. Outside, the village slept under a blanket of stars, unaware that the winds of change had begun to stir. The morning sun spilled golden light over the village, but inside Arjun's modest cottage, a new kind of energy stirred. Mira sat at the wooden table, cradling her daughters, while Arjun prepared to leave for the nearby town. Today was different today. They would seek help beyond the boundaries of their village. Arjun's plan was clear: find allies who could stand with Mira and challenge the cruelty she had endured. He knew that change couldn't come from one person alone. It required a community, voices raised together against injustice. Before he left, Arjun placed a hand gently on Myra's shoulder. "I'll return soon, and I won't come alone. There are others who believe in what's right." Mira's eyes shimmered with hope and gratitude. "Thank you, Arjun, for everything." As Arjun disappeared down the dusty road, Mira sat outside with the twins playing quietly at her feet. Word of her situation had begun to ripple through the village. Some neighbors watched from a distance, their expressions unreadable. But others, women mostly, approached cautiously, offering quiet smiles and nods of sympathy. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Lakshmi appeared, carrying a small basket of fresh vegetables. She was known in the village as wise and kind, often speaking out for those who had no voice. "I heard what has happened," Lakshmi said gently, placing the basket near Myra. "No mother should be treated as you have been." Myra's throat tightened. "I don't know what to do. They want me to leave, to disappear." Lakshmi shook her head. "You belong here, just as your daughters do. We must stand together. I will talk to the village women. Sometimes change starts quietly with us." Encouraged by Lakshmi's words, Mira found new strength. Slowly, more villagers, mostly women, began to visit, bringing small gifts, sharing food, and most importantly, offering their support. Meanwhile, Arjun's journey to the town was not easy. He navigated bustling streets and crowded markets to find the village council and a local advocate for women's rights. His story was met with concern and urgency. The advocate, a spirited woman named Mira, promised to bring legal assistance and awareness to Myra's plight. Back in the village, whispers began to shift. Where there had been judgment and fear, there was now murmurs of solidarity. Some men, inspired by the women's courage, quietly expressed their support. It was a fragile alliance, but it was a start. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Lakshmi gathered a small group of women at her home. They spoke in hushed tones about traditions, justice, and the future they wanted for their daughters and granddaughters. "We cannot let fear keep us silent," Lakshmi said firmly. "If we stand together, our voices will be stronger than any hatred." Mira listened, tears shining in her eyes. For the first time, she felt she was part of something larger, a movement toward hope and change. When Arjun returned days later, he brought with him Mira and 2 other advocates. They came armed with knowledge, determination, and the promise of protection. Together, they planned to confront the village elders, present Myra's case, and demand respect and safety for her and her children. As the night deepened, Mira felt a light growing inside her, a flame of courage fueled by the kindness of strangers and friends alike. No longer alone, she was ready to face whatever came next. The village square was alive with tension. The morning, Arjun, Mira, and their small group of supporters gathered to confront the elders. The crowd was a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and quiet anticipation. Many villagers whispered among themselves, some hopeful, others fearful of the changes being demanded. Mira stood beside Arjun and Mira, clutching her daughters tightly. Her heart pounded not just from nerves, but from a growing sense of strength. The journey had been long and painful, but this moment was pivotal. The village chief, an imposing man with a graying beard and stern eyes, stepped forward. His voice boomed across the gathering. "What is the meaning of this assembly? Who dares challenge our customs?" Mira stepped forward confidently. "We come to speak for justice. Mira has suffered greatly, not because of any curse, but because of fear and ignorance. She deserves respect, safety, and the right to live in peace with her children." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces softened. Others hardened. The chief's eyes narrowed. You speak of changing traditions that have governed us for generations. This is not a matter for outsiders. Arjun stepped beside Mira. Change is necessary when traditions cause harm. Mira's daughters are not a curse, they are a blessing. And their mother deserves protection, not punishment. One of the village elders, an older woman known for her wisdom, raised her hand. Perhaps we have been too harsh, she said quietly. Fear can blind us, but it is not too late to make amends. Slowly others nodded in agreement. The crowd's mood shifted. The elders agreed to listen to reconsider their stance on the treatment of women and girls in the village. Over the following weeks, the village began to change. Mira's in-laws, though reluctant, were faced with the reality that their actions would no longer be tolerated. The women who had once turned their backs now offered support. Children played freely, and the village started to heal from the wounds of old prejudices. Mira found strength she never knew she had. Supported by Arjun and her new allies, she began teaching other women to stand up for themselves, to cherish their daughters, and to dream of brighter futures. Her twins grew healthy and strong, symbols of resilience and hope. One evening, as the sun set in hues of orange and pink, Mira stood outside the cottage, watching her daughters play with other children. Arjun joined her, smiling softly. "We've come a long way," he said. Mira nodded, her eyes shining. "And there's still more to do. But now, I believe in a future where my daughters can live without fear." Arjun took her hand gently. "Together, we will make sure of it." The village had begun a new chapter, one where justice, compassion, and hope replaced fear and cruelty. Mira's story was no longer one of suffering, but of courage, community, and new beginnings.